name is Arian Huggins, and this is my TED Talk today. So first we're going to go ahead and just summarize what the clinical problem is and what my available research was. So during this semester, I went ahead and just focused solely on how social media will affect the mental health well-being of young adults in the world today. Why I chose this was because we have so many people on social media, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, you name it, people are on it. You can't walk the streets or go into a grocery store or even drive anymore without seeing someone on their phone updating their social media. And so with this, there's been actually a lot more mental health problems with young adults, with stress, anxiety, depression, social isolation, things like that. So I really wanted to focus on this because I feel like it is a big problem in the world. I wanted to see how abstaining from social media throughout the day for a couple hours would impact the mental health well-being of young adults, and see if this is actually correlated with each other in any way. So what available research did I have? Honestly, not a lot. I probably chose a very hard question because of the fact that there's not a lot of research on it, and the research that was available on it, there's two different viewpoints. So I used a lot of my research from these articles. So the cognitive behavioral theory based short-term abstinence interventions for problematic social media use, which improved well-being and underlying mechanisms. I also used the relationships between attachment styles and social media action among young adults, meditating the role of self-esteem. And then with those both, I got really great information with detailed summaries and things like that about the experiment. So both of those really helped me to understand the impact of how social media is affecting the mental health well-being of young adults. So now we want to go ahead and just describe how I intended to operationalize the practice in my environment. So right now, obviously, I am a student. I take great pride in being a student at Aspen University. Something that I think that I can do to, put this into practice is in every simulation and clinical we go to, the number one thing as nurses is you always want to get that base assessment. You want to get their baseline. You want to understand if they're declining. You want to understand if they're improving. Like, are your interventions working or are they not? That is the number one thing that we focus on when we first meet a patient. And in this, I feel like a lot of times we focus on the physical health and we're not really focusing on the mental health of the patient, which has a lot to do with everything. Stress, anxiety causes a lot of problems. It can cause digestive problems. It can cause a patient's immune system to become lowered, things like that. So as nurses, I feel like it is important for us to start implementing, really assessing the patient's mental health well-being, their emotions, things like that, especially young adults. They come into the doctor's offices or the hospitals and they're on their phone. So asking them like, hey, do you have any anxiety problems, depression problems? Are you feeling like you're social isolated? And then going further with those questions, asking them, how long do you spend on social media? Do you feel like you have an addiction to social media? How many hours a day do you spend on social media? Are you getting rest at night, or are you up at night because of all these thoughts that are going through your head about social media? And how is social media played in your day? Are you using it just for social interactions, relationships? Are you using it for a job? There's many platforms that people could be using social media. So getting to the bottom of this use and how people perceive it, because a lot of people don't even realize that they have a problem with social media, and understanding their thoughts on it. So we know that during this pandemic, social media has definitely been a huge platform to actually improve social health well-being because everybody was so isolated. It was a way to bring people together. But from that, are we still doing that? Are we just relying on social media to give us that interaction that's not really face-to-face? So understanding your patient's baseline of how they feel about things and where they're at and how much use they use of social media can actually really help us as nurses to set more goals to better improve their overall health. So next we want to kind of focus on the theoretical model that I focused on during this semester. So I chose to focus on Nola Pinder's health promotion model. I believe this model can be used throughout the nursing field. It's just a great model. The theory has shown that different studies have highlighted the efficiency of this model to control unhealthy behaviors, as this theory is based on social cognitive theory, according to which cognitive perceptual factors, so like perceived benefits, barriers, and self-efficacy, which influence the engagement in the health promoting behavior. So Pinder focused on the fact that patients are able to prevent illnesses if given the right resources by nurses, but also explores the means to which patient is available to pursue better health. So in reality, if we're able to give a patient, a good resource, something that they can do, a goal to improve their health and the behaviors that they're doing, then they should have a better overall health and lowered illnesses. So in this instance, I wanted to use this theory because it's like, how can nurses help promote the health and the mental health well-being of patients who are always connected to social media? So I propose giving a 8-hour abstinence throughout the week, and how this can actually affect their mental health. So it doesn't have to be 8 hours in one day. It can be 2 hours in one day of just getting off of social media and giving them something to do during that time, not just having them sit and watch TV or anything like that, but actually having them, set a goal of making plans with friends to go get coffee, or sitting with their little brother and talking, or, helping their elderly grandparents walk down the street. Something that gets them to do something productive, even outside with a group of people that can have a more direct social interaction. So that's why I thought that theory was just the best one overall. So what sources of internal evidence have I used? Well, internal evidence always focuses on research, clinical expertise, patient preferences. So those are the big ones. Of course, we always want to start off in any type of research of getting a patient's baseline. We want to understand, what their health is right now. So I think it's important in all of these studies, which I reviewed, to understand each patient's baseline of how they thought, how they were functioning, if they had any mental health problems at the time, and then implement their journals, making them write journals and about how they felt while using social media, and then the times that they didn't use social media, that they were out doing something productive in the world. I think journal entries were super important to this whole process because it really gave us an insight of the patient's perspective of what was actually going on inside of them and how they were feeling. Again, setting those time limits. So, we wanted the whole week of at least 8 hours of abstinence, but in that we also gave them the luxury of doing an hour here, an hour there. But in those hours, again, setting those goals of getting outside, cooking a meal, being with family, just doing something that's off of social media. So I think all of those were very important types of internal evidence. So are there any ethical considerations? I feel like as a nurse, as a future nurse, hopefully, that ethics is our core. So in anything that we implement, we have to first think, is this ethical? Whether this is, ethical for a patient's culture, ethical for their just overall health. Nurses stand on ethics. So of course, there's always ethical considerations in research. That's something that we always want to look at and consider in everything that we do, especially in diving into these research things, because we don't ever want to use any research that is unethical, because that's not really something that we want to present to anybody on trying to get evidence-based practice changed in any way if it was done in an unethical way. So in my opinion, I feel like all of the studies that I read, they definitely respected the patient's right to protect their health, their dignity, integrity, their right to self-determination, privacy, confidentiality of the personal information of the research subject. So in one of the subjects, I know that they went over all of this with them. They held it at an institution. They gave extra credit work for all of these research students that were in that were subjects of the study. So I just think that overall it's important to dive into your research and make sure that those ethical considerations were taken into account in the studies before you go forward with any of your research with that paper. It's just important to kind of jump down, make sure that that was highlighted, done, that all the subjects knew what they were getting into, what they were supposed to do, what was expected of them, and make sure that their rights were protected in that as well. So I think that that was definitely something that I learned throughout this whole semester, was to not only research studies, but to get into the part of protecting these patients who were involved in the research studies. So ethics is a huge part of research, especially nursing research, that we just need to make sure that we're taking into account of. So next, how do we evaluate these outcomes from our projects? So from my readings, I did a lot on this just to kind of understand how we better do this in the future. Obviously, we always want to progress from our findings. So I found about 11 steps to help. So you want to always evaluate the recruitment, any potential participants. Did you pick the right participants? You know, in this study for me, participants should have been young adults between the ages of 18 and 30, who either we halved it down the middle where it was, you know, some didn't have mental health problems and the rest did. We would need to make sure that there was mental health participants in the group. You always want to evaluate also your maintenance, so keeping participants involved in the program and the data, making sure that throughout the whole study they understood what they were supposed to do, and that they were doing their work. So then you want to evaluate the context, and aspect of the environment of the intervention. Did we hold this in the best place? Could we have done this somewhere else? You know, just bringing patients in from outside of their home and evaluating their baseline, and then a week later doing the same thing. Did we bring them into the right environment for this? We want to evaluate our resources. Huge thing that we've learned this semester is to jump down to the study's resources, see if they're all reliable. Is this data making sense to us? Is it based on real life things? Has it been reviewed? Things like that. We want to make sure that we have those reliable resources to back us up. We want to evaluate the implementation, the extent to which the program was implemented as a design. So just looking over our whole plan. Were these interventions just, did they work, did they not? Could we have tweaked them in some way to get better results? I know in a lot of the studies that I read, they did not give time limits to their participants. So because of that, when they implemented the abstinence, their participants actually felt a lot more depressed because they were just sitting around doing nothing, not knowing what to do during this time off of social media. So next, you also want to evaluate the barriers, so any problems that encountered in the participants, you know, did some of them have social media because it was their job, and this actually was a huge barrier to them because they need social media in order to make an income? Things like that. We need to keep reevaluating this so that in a new study, we can see if we can kind of help these barriers out and change it. We want to reevaluate the exposure, the extent to which participants viewed or read material. So did they make sure that they understood the study? Were they following through with the study's materials? You know, just making sure that they understand what their part is in the study. We want to reevaluate initial use, the extent to which a participant conducts activities. Then we also want to review continued use, the extent to which a participant continues to do any of these activities. So, you know, evaluating 1 week of, you know, the abstinence of 8 hours, maybe the next week a participant did 10 hours because they liked the activities that they were doing off of social media? Like, was this improved? So we're reevaluating everything that they're actually doing. And then lastly, any contaminations, the extent to which participants received interventions from outside the program, and then the extent to which the controlled group received any treatments. So in this, we didn't actually initiate any treatments. We did intervene in things. So was there any people, that had a friend that was like, we're not going to do this today, let's just get on social media and make a video, and you ended up doing 6 hours instead of 8 hours of abstinence? We want to make sure what those contaminations of the project was, because these people were at their homes writing in their journals of what they did, and we want to actually make sure that they did follow through with all of the steps of the project. So I thought those were super important. So how will we spread out? How will we get this knowledge out to everybody? Again, I found about 10 steps to help us with this. So the first one was to just get the basic rights. Define your objects, map your audience, target and frame your message. Make sure that you have a plan of what you're actually putting out to the media. That is super important, because you don't want to come up here combobulated thinking like, and have all these tangents, and then people don't follow and they have no idea what you're talking about. And you want to talk to your audience the way that your audience thinks. You don't want to go into a nursing home and start talking about social media to people, because they won't probably understand most of it. So the second one was keep the right profile. Use websites, social media, research identifiers and academic social networks, hospital boards, colleges, and this, you can post everywhere about this. Social media, although it can be a nuisance, it can actually help to get the word out to everybody. So definitely use any websites or things like that, platforms. The third was to encourage participants. So, get coworkers involved, the doctors that you work with, your teachers, your professors, things like that. Help them help you spread the word of what you are doing, and help them get excited about the research that you're performing. Next is open science for impact. Use open access publications, preprints, publishing databases, and pre-reviews to increase the number of citable research output. So make sure that you're using everything in your ability to just get this out. Make sure people are reviewing it to make sure that your work is correct. Next, you want to remix traditional output. So provide lay summaries, press releases, blogs, and do visual or video abstracts. Make sure that you're just using technology to get everything out and out there. Go live, TED Talks, conferences. This is a way to get interaction out to people, to understand what you're researching, why you're researching it. A lot of people can watch TED Talks while they're driving, while they're at work or just working out. So this is a huge platform to use and get your information out. Next, you want to think visual. Again, people are very visual learners usually. To get their attention, you always want to use bright and flashy things. So just make sure that you're using use of art and multimedia. These are great tools to help you get information out and capture people's attention on what you are researching. Next is respect the diversity. Nursing is all of diversity. We have so much diversity and so many different cultures in nursing, so we always want to make sure that we are creating a message that reflects the gender, demographic, culture of our audience, and make sure that you're focusing on a wide diversity so that you can reach more people in that way. Next is to find the right tools, so using things based on your communication. There's a ton of tools on the internet that you can find for this. And lastly is to evaluate. Is anything actually getting out to the people? Is it working? Do you need to use something else other than Twitter or this website or the other website? Can you get it out through mail or hosting other conferences, things like that? So you always want to reevaluate once you're done. So this is kind of all of my TED Talk. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you learned something from it. Hopefully we can conquer the world of mental health and social media, although there are pros and cons to each. We want to really just look at overall health and make sure that we are providing the best information to all of our patients. Thank you.